Hey, today we're going to talk about the secret to success with Taoist alchemy and internal alchemy, neidan. There is an ingredient that is often missing, at least in the literature and discussion, especially here in the West. That if if we have, enables us to really open up the practice. Um, And that is what I call the difference between cultivation and practice. Okay, so these are two terms that are referencing two Chinese terms, xiu and lian. And these are two different aspects of our training that are both very important. Um, However, it's the xiu, the cultivation, that is primary and is often the least talked about outside of Taoist circles or private lineages. So within my lineage, Longmen Pai, passed on by Wang Liping, cultivation is a very important part of what we're doing, as well as just practicing the methods and trying to master the methods and techniques which we use to create either the elixir or the sacred embryo, right? And these two things are very connected. So in this talk, we're going to go through it and look at exactly what xiu cultivation is and what lian or practice is and how these two should fit together. Okay, so in Chinese, there's this term xiu lian, which means to practice. Probably a good translation for it, as good as any. And it's two characters, xiu and lian, put together. Now, in our lineage, what we to talk about this point, this issue, we break apart these two characters into xiu and lian. And what I've done is I've translated xiu as cultivation and I've translated lian as practice. And this is just a choice I've made within our lineage. Other lineage may be different, right? So just be cognizant of the fact that other teachers might be using these terms in different ways, right? So lian. Now, lian in Chinese, there's two characters it can be referencing, and it depends on the radical that's going on within the character, right? Lian can be prosaic practice of just moving the body, doing some football, whatever it is, and then there's another character for lian, which has a fire radical on the side, which is related to alchemy. And that is refining. We're refining a substance into a more pure substance, right? So 炼净化气. So it's that lian. So that lian is practicing, literally refining, and it talks about using the methods, gaining mastery over the methods, right? There's techniques which are set down in a fairly structured way. We work through and work the body. The main difference between the two lians in our lineage is that the lian of refining is using yinan. So we're using our yinan in a certain way. And that means that we're now refining, not just doing kind of run-of-the-mill exercise, right? And that's practice, it's mastery, it's seeking mastery with the methods and techniques that have been passed down to us. That's all fine and good, but the more important word there is xiu, cultivation. Xiu means to repair or make something better. Right? You can xiu the road, you make the road better. And it's a word for cultivation that stretches back to the Warring States period, thousands of years ago, right? And it's been talked about a lot throughout Chinese culture, throughout Chinese history. And it's a really important word. And I think it's something that often in the West, because we have a different cultural framework, the xiu kind of gets lost. For in the old days, for a Chinese cultivator, the xiu was assumed. It was something that was just a part of what they were doing. And cultivation here means working on the person to become a better person, to chengren, and maybe become a transcendent, to transcend, the chengxian, become immortal, and maybe even return to the Dao, Huan Dao, right? You have, and that's all more a part of xiu cultivation. The lian, the practice, can it can help us understand that process and help us towards that process when we're working on, say, activating the dantian or mobilizing qi or refining jing into qi. It's great stuff and it's purifying. It's very important, but it's just a tool. You don't need it, right? It's just a tool that we can it can teach us about ourselves. We can understand ourselves better, and it's a tool to help us in the with our project of xiu, of cultivation, right? So the cultivation is the thing. It's what we're doing, right? The practice lian is just the thing that gets us to the thing, but the thing cultivation is what we're here doing, at least with our lineage, right? And there are many qigong lineages and neigong lineages, martial arts lineages that are not Taoist, right? But my lineage is the way Master Wang teaches it. His teachers, they're very much identify with being a Taoist, which includes a Sanjiao He, the three teachings as one, so drawing on Confucian and Buddhist stuff as well. But it's a spiritual thing. That's what we're here for. Health is fine, great, but we're looking for. If you define health as uh, um, returning to the cosmos, returning to the source, then yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's the broader project of what we're doing, right? And so cultivation, I think, because it's often assumed in Chinese culture that that's what we're doing this stuff for, it can get lost when it's translated into the West, and it's easy to get just really focused on the practice, the nuts and bolts, the mechanics. Now, that being said, the Taoist approach is to start with the body, right? And we don't talk about this stuff that much. The main thing is working the body. Wisdom comes in later. For the Buddhists, they kind of flip it around. They start with wisdom and then begin working on the body later on. For us, we start with the body, which means we don't talk much about cultivation, right? Making this video, but really the most important thing is working the body, working with the practice, working with cultivation is the most important thing, but initially at the beginning, lian is the most important thing, right? Understanding that just working in the body, not thinking too much about, becoming an immortal and all that kind of crazy stuff, right? And it keeps it very grounded. It keeps the practice very grounded and out of the mind. Because initially, when we start encountering some of this stuff with cultivation and the kind of the big picture of Taoist cultivation, it's easy to get in the mind too much with it, and that can create problems. It's better to go through the body and prepare body and mind and begin approaching cultivation from a different angle than I think in the West we're used to, right? So, in other words, don't think too much about it, right? So this talk is really just to say, hey, be aware of cultivation. It's a thing, but we don't want to think too much about it. Okay, so now in the old days, the way that a student would be prepared for cultivation is through the idea of virtue. Right? So very often in Taoist and Buddhist lineages and traditional lineages, you would start with virtue. And that would be quite often the form of precepts or other things, following certain rules, lineage rules and whatnot. And that just creates an external structure that conditions the self, right? Conditions our trajectory, where we're headed. Right? So what I mean by that is we are the summation of our karma. We're the summation of a series of choices that we've made in the past that have brought us to this point in time, right? So from my perspective, a big part of karma is that in every moment we have a choice between love or fear, anger or not, whatever it is, right? We have a choice in terms of the reactions we can make to the moment and what actions we take in the moment. So choices are both, they can seem positive when things are passive. They can seem passive when things are happening to us, But really, we always have a choice in how we react to that, right? And so initially, what we really want with cultivation, and now this is discussing cultivation, is making the right choices, right? Making choices that, and right is a slippery term, right? And Taoists are very comfortable with slipperiness, right? In other words, you got to figure out for yourself what those right choices are, maybe with the help of a teacher or whatnot. But we need to start making sort of the right choices in the mind about who we are, how we want to live our life, how we want to be in relationship with other people, as a friend, as a partner, as a parent, whatever those relationships are. Uh, how can we make those relationships better, right? And so that's the idea of virtue. And so because we are our karma, or the product of past choices that have brought us right here in this body, right? Our past karma has created the physical conditions we have, as well as our mental, emotional conditions and the outward conditions, because it's all related. It's so virtue helps us making choices for the future that will create some good karma for us, right? And that's part of cultivation. So that's a good starting point. Now, in our lineage, and the way my teacher, Master Wang, teaches, and the way I teach, this process is very much left up to the individual. So we don't have sort of an external structure to help with this. It's up to you to be aware, up to us to be aware of our how we're feeling and how we're thinking about things and how we are in relationships to other people and whatnot. So we have a practice in our lineage. At the end of the day, we think back on the day and think about all the different interactions and the things we did, and we think, could it have been done better? Could I have done that better? And then third thing, yeah, next time, I'm not gonna, say no to my son that way. No, you can't play that video game right now. You got homework to do. I'm going to try and come at, I think I could have done that better. I could have been a better father in that moment. And then program that for the future, right? And so that's a practice that we do in the lineage. And you can do that every night if you like. There's a fairly structured way of doing it, which I'll teach some other time or put in a talk some other time. But you can even just play with that, right? And so it's up to each of us to take ownership of xiu, of cultivation, right? So we can also think of practice or lin as what we do in a session. Maybe do it an hour or two a day, or a couple hours, wherever you're at. And then the rest of the time, when you're not on the mat or practicing, you're out in the world, and that's cultivation, right? In terms of how we're relating to others, relating to the self. And cultivation also includes our motivations for doing things, right? Like, why do I practice Taoist alchemy? Why do I want to practice it? What's my intention, my motivation with that, right? Cultivation is about cleaning up all that stuff. First, getting in touch with it, knowing it, right? Know thyself, and then cleaning it up and reconditioning, repatterning, rebuilding the self in a new way. And this is the secret to mastering Taoist alchemy. Without the xiu, the cultivation, the practice is really tricky, right? And as you can, maybe some of you are wondering, well, what does being a better person have to do with activating my dantian? I'm here to activate my dantian, create some super awesome qi, and do whatever it is you want to do with that. And I get it. That's cool stuff. So let's look into that question a bit. Like how are the two related? Well, first, by conditioning who we are inside and our motivations, our thought processes, all that stuff, right? What we do in cultivation. What will happen is you'll release turbid qi. There's stuff that's bound up inside the body called zhuo qi. And this zhuo qi, this turbid qi, needs to be released. If you have too much turbid qi inside, it's too yin inside the torso, there's no way you're going to form a dantian. Dantian is a very yang thing. It's full of yang qi. I mean, we're fusing yin and yang together, but we're creating a very yang environment within the torso, a yang energetic environment, right? Lu Dongbin, the patron saint of internal alchemy, one of his other names is Chun Yang, like the pure yang. And they're not talking about feminine and masculine. It's not like, it's not that. It's about quality of qi, right? So purifying all the qi inside so it becomes very alive, full of light and movement. And to do that, to create that environment where we can form an actual elixir and then later on the sacred embryo, the turbid qi all has to go. And turbid qi is often associated with um, emotions, thought processes, kind of all that personality stuff that we have inside. Often, we've got positive, negative traits, of course, but there's stuff inside, kind of ways of thinking, which is bound up with that turbid qi, and it's going to block our ability to activate energy centers within the body. So cultivation very much impacts, it creates a ceiling on how far we can ascend with our practice, right? And I think if you're just working with the lian, the practice, trying to do that, that ceiling is always going to be there, right? It doesn't mean cultivation from the Taoist perspective. It doesn't mean you have to, talk about all the drama, and you may have trauma from a kid or past lives, and it's not about going and finding that trauma or whatever. It's about being aware in this moment what's present, and if what is present is blocking, is turbid by nature, then we want to release that and get clean and pure and find the qing, which is pure, right? Right, the jing, 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 the classic of stillness and purity, right? We become still first, and then we want to find purity as well. So xin jing, xin qing, the qing is the purity, and that's releasing turbid qi. And to do that, yeah, we can do it through practice by building up the energy, so the energy activates and cleans it out. That's great, but we also need to come from the perspective of cultivation, xiu, and reworking our perspectives, how we see ourselves, and put it into a more positive way, a positive light. It's really important for our practice, and you become a better person out of it. You'll be happier, have better relationships. I know I have in my life, in my almost 3 decades of training and working with Xiu. It goes hand in hand with the practice, and there's a lot of benefits. And then finally, what I want to leave you guys with today is Xinfa. And so Xinfa can be translated as heart-mind method. It's translated either as core methods, or in this context, heart-mind methods. And Xinfa is it's often associated with Buddhist lineages, especially Chan, but it is within the certain Taoist lineages as well. And so our Taoist lineage very much has Xinfa, and this is it's passing on the ineffable language of the Ling from generation to generation, to be able to tune into what is beyond words in the realm of spirit of Ling, and Xinfa, which is connected to cultivation, right? Because through cultivation, we're not just kind of becoming better people, we're also learning to transcend the self and connect into nature, cosmos, and beyond, right? And so Xinfa is best when it's transmitted heart to heart. So there's no words. But if you can't pick up the no word stuff, then fair enough. There are some words which we can use to help structure what is being passed on, and that's the cultivation stuff. And so within our lineage, we have a lot of lots of stuff like that, practices and terms that we use to help create a framework for cultivation, so to help us know we're kind of going in the right direction. And for example, there's the 4 xiangs, xiang, 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 xiang. And in Chinese, these 4 characters they sound very similar, right? Xiang, 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 xiang. And they help us, those 4 xiangs are terms that we can use to help understand how our thoughts create reality, how we initially have an initial thought that arises, and then that thought begins mobilizing light, in creating an existence, and then we have a product that happens after the light has been mobilized and we've created that, and then there's a final initial image at the end, right? This talk is not the time to unpack all of that. Volume 2 of my book goes into that one, and I might do another talk about it. It's pretty cool. But it's just an example of something that we would be able to look at, right? How our thoughts create reality, and therefore, you know, you might as well have decent thoughts, right? Be positive, you know, and that's where, you know, happiness and gratitude and all that stuff can really help. And that Master Wang, you know, he says, you know, if you might as well just be happy, right? You can't be happy all the time, but you might as well have kind of more positive thinking about things. If you think like, you know, oh, I don't like that person, or that person has something I want, and why don't I have it? Oh, that's not fair. You know, this kind of stuff. It creates it creates a 过程, a process that arrives at a certain thing. And if the initial xiang is from ego, from kind of lesser base self, more animal self, then the final product that we create is going to be a certain quality, right? Whereas if we can create from a more ascended perspective, then from the moment of the initial mobilization of the thought to the final outcome, which can happen very quick. I mean, this is something we go into meditation and try to break apart and experience in meditation. Then the final thing is different than if it's created from ego. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about the Four Xiang. I could really get into that. I think maybe we'll do that next. Maybe we'll do that for next talk. So the example is, there are ways, traditional Taoist ways, that we can use to help frame our cultivation and how we go through cultivation and what's the best thing to do with cultivation. But I think at the end of the day, it really is down to each of us to take ownership of the process. And that's where also a teacher is very good for. A teacher can kind of give you the right piece at the right time. Because of karma, and our Ming is always different, right? Everyone's Ming is different. Everyone's Xing is the same. And we won't go into those two terms. But if you have a teacher, it can be very helpful to kind of give you the right wisdom, the right piece of information, the right practice at the right time to help you in your process of cultivation. And if you don't have a teacher you can work directly with, and just be open to your inner teacher, that Ming Shi, in our lineage we have a special term for it, kind of our hidden master, to give you the information you need. Maybe it's a book you can read, or even just a mantra or something, or certain practice, right, that can help you in terms of your cultivation. And be open, right? It doesn't need to just be stuff that's traditional Taoist stuff. The Taoists are quite flexible in how they approach this stuff, right? So if, you know, maybe it's therapy or something you need, like, who knows, right? Just anything that can help you go through that process of cultivation. And it'll change as well, you know, from month to month, year to year, how you go about it. I think the most important thing, though, is to be aware of it. If you're not even aware that there's this thing called xiu, cultivation, in addition to practice, it's easy to get lost with the practices. At least they're not going to bear any real fruit, right? It's going to be lower level stuff. If you really want to get into this and master this and go through real lasting transformation of the body, of the soul, of, you know, who you are, then I think cultivation is a big part of that picture, right? Okay, so cultivation and practice, xiu lian, both important. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.